Here is something almost embarrassing. The single most powerful breakfast food on your kitchen counter right now costs less than the paper you put it in. It has been eaten, scrambled, fried, boiled, pickled, fermented, poached, and shelled for breakfast in almost every culture, in almost every century. And yet when people are asked to defend it, the answer they reach for is usually vague. Some protein, they say. Fats, they say. And then they reach for the orange juice. So what I want to do in this video is the same thing Richard Feynman would have done the first time someone handed him a nutrition claim at a Caltech cafeteria. He would have walked away from the cafeteria. He would have ignored the headline. He would have ignored the influencer. And he would have sat down and asked, what is this thing really, and what does it actually do once it lands inside a human being? Not what the package says, not what your friend says, not what the latest 30-day wellness blog says. What does the actual molecule do? That is the only question worth answering. So let us teach eggs the way Feynman would have taught them. Pick the object. Pick the question. Pick the simplest possible explanation. Notice what does not make sense. Go back, simplify, use an analogy. And we are going to keep walking until every sentence passes a small, simple test. Could you say this sentence to a curious 12-year-old and have them nod? Anything that fails that test, by the end of this video we are throwing it out. So, the egg. What is it really? Imagine a tiny biological life raft. The white is the suspension fluid. The yolk is the nutrient vault. The shell is the cabinet door. Together, they contain essentially every single nutrient a developing animal needs to construct an entire body from a single cell. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is biochemistry. White plus yolk contains all 9 essential amino acids in roughly the proportions your body can use most efficiently. That is not an accident of evolution. That is the exact reason birds have been successful as a class for 150 million years. The egg is, structurally, the most concentrated complete protein source on your plate. Let us slow down here, because the word protein is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that last sentence, and it deserves to be unpacked. In your body, protein is not just a macronutrient. Protein is the raw material for almost every enzyme that drives your metabolism, every antibody your immune system uses to recognize a cold, every structural fiber that holds your skin together, every contraction your heart performs. Without enough protein, your body cannot repair itself. With enough protein, it can. Eggs, boiled, contain about 6 grams of protein each, with a bioavailability score of roughly 100 out of 100, which makes eggs among the most efficiently absorbable proteins in any food group. Compare that to a scoop of whey, which clocks in around 104, beans around 70, rice alone around 60. Combining rice and beans brings the number back up to nearly egg levels, which is why the world's traditional cuisines, almost without exception, pair grains with legumes. It is not ritual, it is mathematics. But this is the first Feynman pivot. Mathematics in food is only interesting if it explains something you can feel. So what does 6 grams of complete protein in a single egg actually do for you? By morning, if you eat 1 or 2 eggs within an hour of waking, the protein arrives in your small intestine and is broken down into amino acids. Those amino acids, particularly one called leucine, hit your muscles and trigger a specific, well-studied biological switch called mTORC1, which is the master signal that tells your muscle fibers to start synthesizing new protein. The minimum leucine dose needed to reliably flip that switch is around 2.5 to 3 grams. One single egg already gives you about 550 milligrams of leucine in roughly 72 calories. So 2 eggs is more than enough to cross the leucine threshold. 2 eggs at breakfast tells your muscles, in a chemical language they cannot ignore, that today is a day to build. Most people skip that signal entirely. They eat toast. They eat cereal. They eat a banana. None of those reach the leucine threshold. None of them flip the mTORC1 switch. That does not mean those breakfasts are bad. It means those breakfasts leave a specific, easy, free gain on the table. Eggs collect that gain. Now hold that thought, because the second Feynman layer is the one that does the most surprising work. Open up the yolk. Inside that golden half sits a nutrient most people have never heard of, even though it was identified in the 1800s and has been called essential by modern nutrition science for decades. It is called choline, And choline is the raw material your brain uses to build a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is one of the molecules that lets nerve cells talk to each other in the parts of the brain responsible for memory, attention, learning, and mood. About 90% of the population of most countries consumes less than the recommended adequate intake for choline. Most people do not know this because no one tells them. Most supermarket supplements do not contain it. Plant foods contain some, but in a less bioavailable form. Liver is the richest natural source, but most people have stopped eating it. Eggs are, by an enormous margin, the most practical everyday source of choline in almost any cuisine. One large egg delivers about 150 milligrams of choline, of which roughly 90% is bioavailable. The recommended adequate intake for an adult is about 550 milligrams for men and 425 for women. 3 eggs at breakfast covers over 100% of that target, and you still have room in the day for the rest of your meals. The picture that emerges is striking. An entire nutrient, the kind the human brain literally cannot function without, sitting in the cheapest single food on your shelf, ignored by most people at the breakfast table. That is the Feynman moment. The thing that looks ordinary turns out to be load-bearing. Now layer 3. Look at the color of the yolk. That yellow-orange color is not decoration. It is lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoid pigments that accumulate in the macula of your eye, the part of the retina responsible for fine central vision. They absorb the most damaging wavelengths of visible light and act as a natural antioxidant shield for your photoreceptors. Lutein cannot be made by your body. It has to come from food. Egg yolk is not the richest source. Leafy greens are, but egg yolk has a particular advantage. The carotenoids in egg yolk are paired with the yolk's natural fat, which dramatically increases their absorption. Spinach delivers carotenoids too, but the body absorbs a higher fraction of them when they are eaten with some fat. Eggs, conveniently, are mostly fat, so the yolk delivers the lutein and the fat in a single package. That is not coincidence. That is the design of a complete food, and it is one reason why population studies in older adults have repeatedly shown associations between egg intake and slower rates of age-related macular change. That is not a promise, it is a correlation. But the correlation is consistent across large, well-conducted studies, and it points in the same direction year after year. Locked Life 4 is the part of the egg debate that no one in the wellness aisle wants to talk about, honestly, and we are going to be the video that does. Eggs contain a meaningful amount of dietary cholesterol. For decades, between roughly 1960 and 2014, the prevailing medical advice was to limit dietary cholesterol, and, therefore, to limit eggs. That advice was based on a chain of inferences that turned out to be largely incorrect for most healthy people. The current evidence, based on multiple large meta-analyses published through 2024 and 2025, shows that for healthy adults, consuming up to about 1 egg per day is not associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease overall. The Drouin-Chartier 2020 BMJ meta-analysis, which is one of the largest, combined 3 large prospective cohorts with 28 prior studies, and concluded that moderate egg consumption does not raise cardiovascular risk in the general population. A separate dose-response meta-analysis in the European Journal of Nutrition found that, in non-US cohorts, up to 1 egg per day was associated with either neutral or slightly beneficial cardiovascular outcomes. The reasons are well understood. The body tightly regulates its own cholesterol production. When you eat more cholesterol, the liver makes less. The cholesterol in an egg also sits inside a food matrix with fats, phospholipids, choline, and carotenoids, all of which modify how it is metabolized. It does not act like pure dietary cholesterol added to a low-fat meal. None of that means more is always better. Population cohort signals for heart failure have occasionally shown associations at very high intakes, particularly in US cohorts, which tends to reflect what the eggs are eaten with. A 3-egg omelette cooked in seed oil, margarine, and white bread is not the same physiological event as a 3-egg omelette cooked in olive oil beside some greens. The load is the same. The matrix is different. This is the second Feynman pivot, and it is the one most internet content cannot resist fudging. Correlation is not causation. Mechanisms are not destinies. A nutrient inside a complete food matrix is not a nutrient isolated in a supplement pill. Eggs eaten whole, cooked gently, paired with some fiber, are almost certainly a different signal from powdered egg whites eaten alone with bacon. This nuance is not optional. It is the difference between understanding and being fooled again and again by a headline. Now layer 5, and this is where the egg story gets a little philosophical, so bear with me. There is a property in nutrition research called satiety, which means how long a given food keeps you satisfied before hunger returns. Eggs score remarkably high on satiety indexes, in the upper tier of virtually every single food group tested. In randomized breakfast trials comparing isocaloric eggs with cereal, bagels, or toast, the egg group consistently reports lower hunger, lower afternoon snacking, and lower total daily calorie intake, despite eating the same number of calories at breakfast. The mechanism is fairly intuitive. High protein plus high fat plus slow digesting nutrients produces a slower gastric emptying rate, more stable blood sugar, more sustained release of satiety hormones like GLP-1, PY, and CCK. That is not a fad. That is a powerful lever for anyone who eats breakfast and would prefer not to snack by 11. Eggs win the lever at almost zero cost. Layer 6 is the one practitioners, and not just academics, should care about. Eggs contain vitamin D, one of the very few foods that contain meaningful amounts of it in a form the body can use. They contain selenium, which is critical for thyroid function. They contain vitamin B12, which your nervous system needs for the myelin sheaths wrapping every nerve fiber. They contain iron in a high bioavailability heme form. They contain folate, which is required for DNA repair and for fetal neural development. And they contain vitamin A in a form that supports immune function. None of these are at sky-high levels in one single egg. The cumulative picture is what matters. Because the egg has been shaped by evolution as the canonical complete food for a developing organism, it necessarily delivers a near-complete spread of micronutrients at roughly the right proportions to construct a healthy body. This is not nutrition hype. This is what the genome of an organism that needs to start as one cell tells us about optimal early nutrition. The egg is the answer that natural selection already arrived at. We did not invent it. We can at most ignore it. Now let us put the whole Feynman picture together, because that is what Feynman would have done with a voice that size. Imagine the egg as a tiny round economy. The white is the construction crew, supplying every amino acid your muscles need to build tissue. The yolk is the parts warehouse, supplying the fat-soluble vitamins, the trace minerals, the carotenoids for your eyes, the choline for your brain, the cholesterol that helps build every cell membrane in your body. The shell, if you eat it ground up as some cultures do, even contributes calcium, one round food, 9 essential amino acids, roughly 16 vitamins and minerals. A complete, time-tested, evolutionarily validated nutrient bundle that scales with your body almost perfectly. That is the object. The question actually becomes then is not whether eggs are healthy. The current evidence suggests that for most healthy adults, roughly 1 to 3 eggs per day, eaten whole, cooked gently, paired with other whole foods, is one of the most nutrient-dense breakfast choices available. The question becomes why almost no one exploits the possibility. Why the average adult skips breakfast, or chooses cereal, or chooses a beverage that they then call breakfast. Why the most nutritionally complete single food on earth is the one most often vilified by fad cycles. And the deeper Feynman question underneath that, and the one I want you to carry with you forever after this video, is this. Why do most people, when they encounter a claim about food, accept the claim on the basis of either fear or fashion, instead of reading the actual mechanism? The mechanism is not that hard. The lecithin in the yolk forms choline. The choline becomes acetylcholine. The acetylcholine lets nerve cells talk. The carotenoids are absorbed with the fat. The protein triggers leucine. The leucine flips mTORC1. There is nothing in that chain that requires a PhD. There is nothing in that chain that requires a guru. There is only a willingness to slow down and follow the molecule. That willingness is the Feynman technique. That willingness is, in the long run, the only thing that protects you from spending the rest of your life being alternately frightened and seduced by nutrition headlines. Now, I want to be careful, because the honest part of this explanation is the part that earns trust. Eggs are not magic. Eggs are not a cure. Eggs are not appropriate for everyone. If you have a diagnosed familial hypercholesterolemia, eggs are something to discuss with your lipidologist. If you have a strong egg allergy, the entire video did not happen for you. If you have chronic kidney disease and have been told to limit protein, you already know this conversation needs to run through your renal dietitian. If you eat 3 eggs every morning drenched in saturated fat, sitting on white bread with bacon on the side, the egg is not the problem in that meal. The matrix around the egg is the problem. If you eat 3 eggs every morning on a bed of greens with avocado and slow carbohydrates, the matrix lifts the egg. The matrix is almost always more important than the single food. That is not a protest. That is a settled, mature position in nutrition science, and anyone telling you otherwise is either oversimplifying for engagement or oversimplifying from a place of outdated fear. So, the protocols I recommend, in the Feynman-esque spirit of saying no more than necessary: 1 to 3 whole eggs per day. Cooked gently, meaning soft-boiled, poached, or gently scrambled at low heat. The temperature of cooking matters, because high heat oxidizes the cholesterol in the yolk and slightly reduces the bioavailability of the carotenoids. If you pair the eggs with a fiber source, the satiety benefit compounds. If you pair them with a fat source like olive oil or avocado, the carotenoid absorption improves. If you pair them with vegetables, the micronutrient spread on the plate roughly doubles. If your goal is athletic, 2 to 4 eggs post-training is a particularly high leverage choice because the leucine threshold and the choline and the vitamin D all support recovery. If your goal is steady cognition through a long working day, eggs at breakfast measurably hold your energy and attention more stable than cereal does and carry almost zero financial cost. If your goal is healthy aging, the choline plus the carotenoids plus the high bioavailability protein is a near-perfect protein for slowing age-related muscle loss and guarding the macula. There is no hidden trick. There is no 30-day protocol. There is one food, eaten consistently, eaten whole, paired intelligently. Let us close the way we will probably never hear the average wellness video close. With a small, simple act of practice. Tomorrow morning, take 2 eggs, soft-boiled or gently scrambled in olive oil. Set them on a plate beside some greens, beside some slow carbohydrate if you want it, beside some fruit if you want it. Eat slowly. Notice, around the second egg, that the hunger that normally pushes you toward a mid-morning snack is quieter than usual. Notice, around the 3rd or 4th day, that your afternoon energy has stopped dipping the way it used to. Notice, after a month, the small, quiet steadiness that has settled into your body. That steadiness is not magic. It is the cumulative reward of giving your brain its choline, your muscles their leucine, your eyes their carotenoids, your cells their phospholipids, 365 days a year. It is the same logic Feynman used every time a colleague at Caltech tried to sell him a complicated theory with no mechanism. He always asked, "Where is the molecule?" Follow the molecule. The molecule in this case is sitting in a 6-gram complete protein, lipid balanced, evolution tested, bioavailability perfect, near costless single round object on your kitchen counter. Eat the egg. Then go learn the next thing the way he would have learned it.